So thanks a lot for having me here today. It's always a delight to take the stage, especially I think we were joking earlier, half of the esteemed speakers today, we speak at a lot of conferences together, so hopefully our messages will merge in together. I always start, if I only have one slide to show in my deck, this is what I show, and a couple of reasons, besides the famous saying, but water is very personal, and I think that point was made earlier, and that's what makes it such a difficult substance to manage and a difficult topic to discuss, because it's very, very personal. I have a water story, Bob's got a water story, you've all got water stories. Everybody has a water story who's a water person, and that's very personal to them. So that's something, and you'll see over and over, I always flavor my talk with personal anecdotes, and the beautiful lake on the right there is Lake Annette at Jasper, and that's where I spend most of my summers swimming. That's my local swimming hole. So the other point on this chart is, and again, others have already mentioned it, but when we think about water, we think about it globally, you have to plan for it regionally, but you always have to deal with it locally. And so it's a very, very local thing. So that's how my presentation is set up today. I am going to talk a bit about the global scene, quite a bit about that, focusing in on the agricultural implications, a bit about regional planning, and then and some local initiatives. Water issues, as we know, are very, very complex. I think we've seen this in a lot of slides, but there needs to be water for people, water for industry, water for the environment, water for food, which is why we're here today. But all of that is surrounded by the fact that water crosses international boundaries. It's mobile, it's fluid, and it's something that people fight over. So it's very, 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 very complex. This is an oldie but goodie from the World Health Organization and others, just talking about what the global water resources are. And I particularly like this presentation. It's got the standard numbers of, sort of 97.5% of the water is in the salt. And then moving to the right of the chart there, you see how it's broken out into glaciers and rivers and groundwater and flowing. But the fundamental point is at the end, after all this is said and done, and from the World Health Organization, if you calculate out all of those numbers, there actually ends up being about 12,500 billion cubic meters of water in the world that replenishes annually. And that's in different forms and in different spaces. Water's never created or destroyed, as we know, it shifts forms. But that's about how much water there is to work with over the course of the year, every year. And if we look at where that goes, there's another fundamental concept on this chart, and that is the difference between abstractions or withdrawals and the concept of use, what's actually used and changes form so that it's not available to others to use farther downstream. And if you look at it, this is pretty common around the world, that about 2/3 of the water that's taken out of a river or a lake or the ground is utilized for agriculture. And then you can see the other breakout for industry and domestic use. The other big point, though, is if you that's the abstractions, the withdrawals. The actual use, that is the water that's going into the system and not available for those downstream, at least this year anyway, is that 93% of the world is actually used in agricultural to produce food. And that's a very large number. If we look then at what the population is, as we can see, this is again pretty common knowledge, heading toward 9 billion people on the planet, somewhere between 2035 and 2050. But the key on this one as well is that a huge amount of that growth of the population is actually, does this work? Here, I'm not a pointer person, you see. Oh, there you go, cool. So looking at the growth, it's all happening in the less developed countries. I mean, that's where the majority of the population is growing. And the other thing is, in these less developed countries, that's where you're seeing real increases in income and also in GDP, a large amount of growth. Now, one thing about increasing GDP and increasing income, is that if you got more money or your economy's growing, you actually eat better quality food. And I didn't put that chart in, but I mean, that's fairly well known. And if you're eating a more higher quality food, well, you know, again, this is fairly common. This is from water footprints, but you know, the amount of water that's going in or utilized in different kinds of food it varies drastically. And if you now have more income and you want to get better food, you're actually going to start eating a lot more protein, and the higher protein consumes a lot more water. And in fact, over the last 20 years, the 40% of the increase in protein consumption in the world has been in China. And that's where, you know, a huge increase is coming. So that has big implications for water and for the growth of water. And therefore, you know, this is again a fairly common curve, and there's lots of different numbers coming out. But this one is by about, you know, somewhere between 2025, 2030, 2035. You get numbers in around about the 6,000 billion cubic kilometers, or billion cubic meters, sorry, or 6,000 cubic kilometers of water that's consumed. And that, you know, some say 5.8, some say 6.4, but it's in about that range. So if we have about 12,500 available and we're only going to be around 6.5, should that be a problem? Well, it is. This slide comes from a study from the 2030 Water Resources Group work that McKinsey and Company did quite a bit of. And it starts to show something that is really important, because it's water varies. You know, we may have that's total numbers we've been talking about that 12,500. But if you actually look at on a basin by basin basis, and I think most of us today would say you have to look at water on a basin basis, and you start to say where is that and which basins are under stress, the amount of actual water is considerably less than what that 12,500 is. And I don't have my glasses on, so I'm going to turn around. Yeah, so this number here, of course, is about a third of what this number is, but it does start to show that by this time frame of this 2030, we could be looking at shortages in some basins on average, in the stressed basins, of about 40%. Which is significant. And I think we start to see that now in terms of the food. And I recommend this report. There's a couple of reports that we pulled up that I would recommend that you look at. And this one from the Food and Agricultural Organization from the United Nations. And this one says a couple of really critical things, and that is, you know, toward 2050, that our rising population income is expected to call for 70% more food production. So, you know, that's really important. And as that food production goes up, your water consumption goes up. So water and food are completely interrelated. And the other point that this paper makes is that the majority of the increase in productivity and the food that needs to be produced is going to come from areas that are already producing the food. And I thought that was quite interesting. There is I think some of the stuff we're starting to look at is what the risks to food production are. Bob showed a chart about the transfer of virtual water. And if we look at where the majority of the food is being produced today, I mean, where are the big bread baskets? You know, Canada, the US, Australia, some of the South American countries, France, interestingly enough. But if you look at this chart and see where are all the stress points coming in, and the top three bubbles, the bluish bubbles, are all to do with water. Water shortages, water overages, flooding, and pollution. You can start to see where those areas in the world are that are under pretty severe stress. And I like this one, and I kept it in its original format from the U.S. Department of Energy, looking at food yield changes to 2050, taking into account climate change considerations and demand considerations. What's really and changing in the soil, you know, you look around the world and realize that with Alberta and Western Canada, we're one of the few places in the world currently producing a lot of food that's going to actually have the capacity to produce more. And, you know, some of the other areas under really severe stress in South America and in the States, Australia, these places, which are currently the breadbaskets, are going to be able to not keep up. So I think there's going to be tremendous pressure on us in Alberta to produce more food. And to me, I mean, one of the jokes is, you know, when I came out of engineering school and moved to Alberta, our goal was to make energy, produce energy. And for people coming out of school today, young engineers that come to work with us, you know, it's this water, food, energy trade-off, and that's the big challenge for public policy in Alberta and for the young engineers today. You know, we have water for food, water for energy, God forbid food for energy, but it's how all of that interacts, and that's the public policy challenge for Alberta. And one of the reasons for that, you know, I think Canada overall, and again, you always have to think there's a global picture, but regionally and locally things can be different, but overall, Canada is really perceived in the world as having lots of water compared to other places per person. And that's a perception. Again, that may not be necessarily always locally, but it's certainly the perception overall. And we don't show up well on the OECD environmental monitors. Again, depending on the source, Canada can be the biggest water consumer or the second biggest, but you know, the facts are we are perceived as being a very big water guzzler. And you can say, okay, Canada and the US, we do more industrial production, etc. And that's fine, but I think the point also is that we've increased our water consumption considerably over the last 30 years, and that actually is what's got people more concerned. And if you tie that back to the whole issue of where people view that we're using our water, we do work with the oil sands companies, and one of the things that I always say to them in their communication is, because they go, oh, it's all those nasty farmers, right? They're the ones that are using all the water. We don't use that much water. They don't care. If we're using one drop of water to produce energy that could be used to produce food, if you're not getting enough food, you care about that. And so I think that's a very big message for how we're presented. And some other things, again, it was fun doing a new talk. We got to find some new material. And one of the things we found in Maclean's was this little survey here. Let's see if I can do this again. That showed that, Canada, 50 to 57%, feel that our environmental performance is damaging our reputation. This is unheard of. When I came out of engineering school, we were all like, Canada's the best in the world in environment. So this is a huge shift, and the other key point is that it's not just people, the protesters. Greenpeace and hanging off the Shell building and stuff. That's some of it. But it really is now the investors, and I think this little statement out of Maclean's by a Queen's grad friend of mine, Richard Powers, by the way, is a very powerful statement. It's not just the protesters anymore; it's the European investment community and the people supplying. We do work with Statoil. It wasn't pretty at their last AGM with their board of directors. Those are the people that are putting pressure on us to improve the way we're perceived in the world. So with that, on the good news side, because I'm an engineer, I was to fix things, and not to read all this, but there is a very interesting report that was produced about a year and a half ago by the 2030 Water Resources Group. And I would commend it to you to read. And the points that it makes are that, again, water's not created or destroyed, but we, and most countries, not all, but most have the water resources to be able to do what they need to do. It's just we're not managing them very well. And that can be a bit of a good news story because there's something we can do about it. And I'm a big adaptation person, so I took some heart in this. But they do say very clearly, if we don't do anything, we are headed down a very slippery path. So I would commend that report to you. So that's kind of that's the global piece. Now, if we start to think about more regionally, again, I believe in adaptation, and adaptation strategies, certainly in Alberta, are very different in the north and the south. We can see our pretty normal rainfall chart. The big red area in the lower right hand, of course, is is the drought area. And when James Palliser came marching across in the mid-1850s, I mean, he happily declared that nobody would ever live, or nothing would ever grow in southeastern Alberta. So interestingly enough now, in that red and orange area, 66% of the irrigated land in Canada is in that red and that orange section. 66% of that irrigated land in Canada, which is a lot of land. So we have been able to do some water management, and I think, as folks have said, remanaging. Some basins are completely remanaged, and certainly that's the case with the South Sask. But there are very different strategies. In the south, we have irrigation. We want to maintain our beautiful landscapes. The trees out in the back happens to be the view from my back door, across the mountains. My camping spot in Jasper, where we have a lot of the rainfall coming down that Bob talked about, and then of course our industrial use of water in the north. These are just rough numbers to give you a sense. Alberta, we're not that different. We're different from the rest of Canada, where so much of our water flows abstractions is used for power production, particularly hydro. But here in Alberta, about 2/3 of the water that we consume, is going into the agriculture. And then you can see the breakout. The purple area there is for watershed management and protection of our environment. And that's my dog Chinook lounging beside the Athabasca River at our campsite, where we go to every year. So there's three, I think it's already been said, there's three industries that face major challenges. I mean, the municipal development kind of industry. I live west of Calgary. I just watch that vinyl wave come crashing toward me every day, literally every day. The oil and gas industry, and then of course agriculture. Now, if we look at the South Saskatchewan, and by the way, I think oil and gas is the most likely to adapt. I don't go into that a lot in this, but I think it is, because it has the ability to adapt. Some of these other issues are much more difficult to deal with. So in the South, there are about 85% of the water, estimated water use, and this is the consumption, is for agriculture. There's hardly any oil and gas even on that. But again, if you live on the edge of that rural, agricultural, municipal space, where I do and have for 26 years, you really see this tension between the agricultural use and the municipal development, especially, someone's already mentioned, around stormwater. We're doing active work in stormwater now. Very, very big issue in terms of water management in the south. Now, the biggest thing that's happened in Alberta, and I think Andy's probably going to talk about some of the rules on this, but this basin, the South Sask Basin, was closed in August of 2006. And all of a sudden, overnight, water went from being something that had virtually stand in the shower all day and nobody really thought about it, to something now where you can have a conference with all these. We couldn't even get a seat in here this morning when we came in. We were 5 minutes late. And it's just such a critical and important issue. And there's some really key policy issues that are being talked about and developed now. Water allocation policy. David Percy will be talking about that later. He's the best in that area. Storage issues, license transfer allocation issues. These are very, very big issues in the south. I just wanted to give one quick summary, though, in terms of things that can be done on the adaptation side. This has already been pointed out. The big issue in the South Sask is the up and down. It's the variability and more flooding and more drought and how you deal with that. A project that we've been working on for some time now is called the Bow River Modeling, and the idea there was to say, if you could get the license holders, the big license holders, in a room and have them talk intelligently about how to move that water around and how to deal with that in a time of a flood or in a time of a drought, maybe we could make a big difference. And in fact, this project has gone ahead, the planning part of it in terms of the Bow River project. And by doing some pretty basic, simple things on the river, we've been able to model that there could be a significant improvement. And the whole concept is actually using storage and storage on the TransAlta system. The Bow is 11 dams, right? It's really dammed up, and there's a lot of storage in behind that, and to be able to utilize that to be able to manage river levels up and down, to do things like someone was mentioning earlier, maintain a flow levels just south of Bassano Dam. Right now, that basically goes to nothing at some points during the year. And if you can maintain a basic flow south of the Bassano Dam, the fish will continue to live, and there's some benefits in the Kananaskis as well. If you want to know more about this project, you can actually just go on albertawater.com, and there's quite a discussion of it on that site. I can't, in the last minute or two, do anything but talk about, of course, the Cross Iron Mills Balzac piece. And I live in Rocky View, so the idea was, what Rocky View gave a permission for this developer to build this big racetrack, casino, mall, etc. Then the basin closed, and then they had to find ways to get the water there. So the Western Irrigation District, and I think this started out as a very thoughtful thing, said, look, if we can take you know what an irrigation ditch is, right? It's just a hole in the ground, basically. So they said, if we can encapsulate that water, put it in a pipe, and Rocky View, you pay for it, we'll deliver you the water savings, and you can use that for your thing. Well, I live in Rocky View. That costs $15 million. It's my tax dollar. Okay, so some of the issues on this. Am I happy that my $15 million, our tax dollars went to build a casino and a racetrack? No. Right? No, it's very personal to me. I'm not very happy about that. But who's going to decide, right? Who decides what the best and highest use is? This is a very, very big issue. And the other point is, we're paying for water now, right? Water has a price now. So I think, I personally, this is only my personal view, I think it would be great to make this system from a black market system to make it, I'm a free market, get it out in the open. Because if it's out in the open, then we can all know, we can all talk about that. And so you can talk to David Percy about that later, because he knows all about that. And this, of course, the last one, water wealth for farmers, but what's the future of the family farm? Under Lauren Taylor, water rights and land rights are now separate. You can sell your water rights, and you can sell your land rights. And so what's the future of the family farm? And since we happen to be in a big election, we know who elects the government in this province, right? I mean, because Rocky View, I can tell you there's some unhappiness out there. We know who elects the government in this province, so it's important to make sure this is done right. I'm just going to take 2 seconds on the Athabasca. I think, the basics on the Athabasca are that very little water is actually being abstracted from this river. The issue, though, is one of the annual flows. It's not dammed, it's actually not managed. And this river is highly, highly protected, and that's probably appropriate. So what's the issue? The issue is actually, though, that most of the abstractions are going to oil sands. I mean, that is the issue, and this is what it kind of looks like, and the previous speaker spoke to this. What I can say is, and I absolutely believe this, is that there are activities that the industry is now starting to look at, collaborative ways of managing water better and working with the community that are going to make significant differences. But you have to show results, and that gets back to the previous chart. We know about land use. All I want to say on this one is, and this is supposed to look complicated, no offense to Andy Ridge or anybody from SRD, but this is the whole Alberta Land Stewardship Act in this process is producing land use plans, and it involves local people. And that kind of brings me to my wrap-up, which is it gets right back down to the very local piece. We have an international industry, and in food, international industry and energy, and local people are the ones that are making the trade-offs. And in the South Saskatchewan, trading off between, the farm, the city growth, the beautiful landscapes, oil and gas, and protection of our watersheds. That trade-off's being made. And in the lower Athabasca, you have people trading off wood buffalo, the river itself, the industry, communities, First Nations communities, and then the amount of money that's getting generated by this industry over the years, like $1 trillion worth of value. So that's all being traded off locally. So last, I think implications for our development. I think that we are going to see water shortages in the south, threaten the availability of some of our more traditional freshwater supplies. I think the allocation system as it exists is going to get changed somehow. I think that's inevitable that it's going to get changed. The pressure on the industries is going to be to collaborate and work together, and something I think we should all welcome. I think we're going to continue to see more ENGO activity. I think we've seen that a lot over the last couple of years. The investors and suppliers are going to start taking a more active role in the companies. I think we've seen that and putting pressure on. Local people make the local trade-offs, and the last one, I absolutely think we're going to see more government involvement, and we've seen that now. Someone's already mentioned about the monitoring, this environmental monitoring plan coming in from the federal government. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So that's, in conclusion, my talk.